Interest rates are low. I'm making my payments. And in fact, with low interest rates, I can borrow more money to buy a house or stocks or Bitcoin. And they keep going up in value because interest rates are low. So I guess the debt I'm incurring to buy those things is good, right? But how do you know if you have too much debt and you're at risk? Well, Ted and I are going to talk about it starting in 8 seconds.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Ted, welcome back. So you remember episode number 341.
Like it was yesterday.
Where we talked about high interest loans and taking on more debt to pay the interest on your existing debt and getting deeper and deeper into the debt hole. And now you and I are debt averse.
That's a safe statement.
So we see the carnage caused by excessive debt. You know, too much debt, you go bankrupt. I can make the case that some debt is good.
You can. You'd be wrong.
Well, but if you bought a house at any time in the last 50 years, even if you levered yourself all the way up, you have made money, you know, depending on when you're watching this show, if the real estate market has crashed. So why don't we start with a discussion of leverage? What is leverage? Okay.
Well, so the concept of leverage is you're getting more bang for your buck, punching against your, punching in a higher category. How do you describe this? What's a sports metaphor for this?
Punching above your weight.
There you go. So the little guy is beaten Goliath. Or Goliath? Which one was Goliath?
Yes, Goliath was the big guy.
I'm completely
Ted
lost,
is not good. Give us a car analogy. You're good at that. So
the idea behind leverage is you're getting a better result for the amount of effort that you're putting into it. I mean, what's the physics thing with a long enough lever I could move the world, right? That was some.
I don't know if that's true or not, but okay, I guess if you had a fulcrum.
Problem is you need a fulcrum that you got to put the lever on. But so leverage is a good thing. You're getting better results for the amount of effort that you're putting into it. So when you're talking about it in relation to money, it means you are getting a better result for your money than if you didn't do it.
Yeah, and as a result, anybody who bought a house, even if they only had the minimum down payment, even if they bought way too big a house that they really couldn't afford, in a lot of cases, it's worked out great because, well, I had to borrow a lot of money on credit cards to finance, you know, all the stuff I bought for my house and my living expenses and to pay the mortgage. But the house went up in value by so much that I can sell the house today, pay off all my debts, and still have lots.
Yeah, there's only been a few short periods of time when the market has corrected that people have got burned on real estate. So that's a good example for leverage.
If you bought at the exact peak in, 2017 and tried to sell a year later or something, then okay, perhaps you got burned. But if you held it for a long enough period of time. So there you go. There's the conventional wisdom. Buy as much house as you possibly can. Everything will be great. There must be a downside to what we are describing. So we are in an era of low interest rates now. Is that the only thing I need to worry about?
Well, so the cost of borrowing is the first thing you focus on. How much is it going to cost me to use somebody else's money? But more important than that is, can you actually make the damn payments? So people often forget that, okay, well, the interest is free, so it's great. I'm going to buy this car over the next 7 years. I'm going to have a car. But you still have to make the payment every month. And the more of these payments you pile up, it doesn't matter now that the interest is free on all of them. You can't afford to make the payments. You're going to run into trouble.
Yeah. So if I'm buying a big truck that costs what is a big huge? I mean, you know more about these things than I do. So a big huge
loaded pickup truck's going to cost anywhere from $60,000 to $85,000.
$80,000. Let's say.
It's going to have human skin upholstery, all the really nice features.
Which is just stunning to me that a vehicle can cost $80,000. But okay, so I buy this $80,000 vehicle.
Yep.
Well, if the interest rate is zero and the payments are spread over 80 months, then that's $1,000 a month.
Correct.
Which is a huge number.
Yes, and it's a huge number for a long period of time.
Because 80 months, I don't know how long that is, but that's
just shy of 7 years.
Yeah, so that's a long time. So even with low interest rates, debt can still be a problem.
Well, and compounding that in the case of a car, for the first 4 years of you making those payments, you still owe more than the car is worth as soon as you drive it off the lot. So you're already in the hole, even though you're not paying any interest.
Yeah, so you can't get out of it by just giving the vehicle back because then you suffer through a shortfall. So I want to talk about how I know I've got too much debt, but let's walk through then the life cycle of this then.
Okay.
So, and you give the example of the person buying a car. Okay, I bought the vehicle because I assumed I could make the payments. Maybe I didn't actually think about it, so there's your first tip. But I assumed I could make the payments. How do I get into trouble then? What happens?
Well, because the only thing we are all certain of is that there's going to be change. So it's either going to be change for the good or change for the worse. And so when something bad happens, most people haven't adequately planned for it. So the example, I got that truck loan. I'm paying $1,000 a month for the next 7 years. And then 6 months from now, I find out that I'm going to be off work for a few months because I've got a medical problem. Like, I don't want to identify which one it is, but something that takes you off work. And so now instead of
in 2020, where there was this virus that went around.
COVID? Is that what you want to talk? Yes. We promised we weren't going to do that.
We will not mention that. But there you go. There's an unanticipated thing that pretty much pooched everybody.
And EI doesn't pay what your salary paid when you were working before, right? And so now you've got lower cash flow. You got to find a way to make up the differences because your income can drop overnight. Your expenses never will. Your expenses are going to be some sort of contract, like the loan payment that we're making, or the rent on your home or your mortgage. These are things you got to pay whether the money's coming in or not. And so the way you respond, well, okay, I'll have to rely on my credit. And then I'm relying more on credit. And then maybe the time off gets extended beyond what you originally planned, and you're now even deeper into credit. Well, you've used up all the credit you can afford. You're now accessing more expensive, higher risk types of credit. And it just becomes a snowball. It's rolling down the hill. At some point, it's going to get to be a bigger problem than you can deal with.
Well, so let's talk about that then. How do I know then if I have too much debt? What is it? Is it a math question or is it a more?
Well, let's look at it two ways. So let's look at it the real things that are occurring that'll give you warning signs. But there's also these intangible things that happen. Which one do you want to talk about
Let's
first?
start with intangible then. I don't know what that word means, but that sounds good. So, yeah.
Right. Well, so these are things you may not think of, but let's say your friends, your family all notice that you're getting more irritable. Well, it's because you're experiencing stress. Why are you experiencing stress? Because something is nagging at the back of your mind, and it's, my God, have I got enough money to make these payments? Have I accumulated more debt than I can handle? Are you not sleeping as well as you were before? Again, it's a symptom of the stress. What's causing the stress? Well, right now, everybody, we're all dealing with this damn COVID thing again, which now it's twice we've said. But there are other things that cause stress, and money is one of the worst ones. It's one of the most insidious. You'll talk to your family, friends about your medical situation, about how bad you're feeling if something's going wrong. You don't talk to people about your money. If you've overextended yourself and you're now starting to worry about it, you got to find some relief for that. And the relief is to talk to somebody who's trained to deal with these problems.
Yeah, and if you don't have someone to talk to about it, the stress becomes internalized and it just gets built up and up and up.
Yeah.
And we see that all the time with people who come in to see us. They're down,
Yep.
Their shoulders are down. They're, embarrassed to be in here. It's a very stressful situation. I mean, another intangible one is there's all this unopened mail.
Right. Or you're afraid to answer the phone.
Yeah. Now, I guess, in this day and age, everything's electronic. So I've got a whole bunch of unopened emails or something, but it grates on you and it comes up. It's not an immediate thing. It's not like being in a car accident. Well, I know I was in a car accident and I've got this whiplash. Right. It's over a period of time because I gradually get a little bit behind, and it's gradually building. And it is pretty stressful if you've got 5 or 6 different credit cards and they each have 5 or 6 different payment dates a month. Right. And I got to pay this guy and that guy. And so now I'm spending a whole lot of time juggling and I'm really afraid I'm going to miss one. That's pretty stressful.
Well, and there are people that get really good at, okay, so on the 5th, I got to pay this one. Then I can take that money out again. And on the 8th, I can pay this one. And all you're doing is you're spiraling downwards.
So that's the whole stress cycle of the intangibles, the stuff you can't touch. Let's go through some tangible ways then that you can know that, I've got too much debt. Okay. What would be the obvious ones that would occur to you right off the top of your head?
The month runs out and you run out of money before you run out of bills. So you can't actually make that minimum payment on all of the debts that you've got. So you've got a regular schedule of things that you've got to deal with. And every month you find that I can't. Right.
Yeah. The month is over and there's still no money there. So minimum payments.
Right. If all you're ever doing is making minimum payments, well, you see the notes on the credit cards now. I mean, they tell you that it'll be 150 years before you pay it off. I'm pretty sure we'll all be dead.
Yeah, likely. That would be my estimate as well. Yeah, and we all think, well, not we all think, but there are people who think, well, I'm making my minimum payments, so everything is good.
Right. Well, and if you're somebody who owns the bank stock that's making the interest off that minimum payment, things are really good.
Absolutely. Yeah, But making just the minimum payments is not enough.
Correct.
Because you hit the nail on the head. You are now paying a huge amount of interest. So we've got to shift our thinking to saying, well, I'm making the minimum payments to, well, no, I'm completely taking care of everything every month.
Right.
So if you're just making the minimum payments because that's all you can afford to make, you've probably got too much debt.
Right.
If you've got a cash shortfall every month, you've probably got too much debt.
Well, and cash shortfall means you're relying on credit for your basic living expenses. So are you using credit cards to pay for the groceries, the gas in the car? Are you taking cash advances to pay for the rent? I mean, these are all very serious warning signs.
Yeah, and there's so you made 2 points there. So, I mean, I've got no problem with people using their credit card to buy stuff because if you get points or, I don't want to be carrying cash to the grocery store or whatever. And if you go to the grocery store and buy your groceries and you go home and make a payment and you pay off your credit card, fine, but nothing wrong with that. You earned your points.
Yeah, what did you used to say? Do you remember?
A credit card should be a substitute for cash, not a way to borrow.
Correct.
I probably said it more succinctly in the past, but yeah, if you are using it in place of the cash that I've got in my bank account, fine, no problem.
Big deal. It's a convenience.
It's a convenience. But if you're using it as a way to borrow, then that's a problem. Now, then you also made the point about taking a cash advance on one card to pay the other.
Right.
So didn't we used to call that kiting?
They did with checking accounts. That's what it is.
So what's the problem with that?
Well, so you're not actually paying down the debt. There's no real money anywhere. So the kiting law used to be, I've got a bank account A, and I write a check on bank account B to deposit into A. And then I write a check on A to deposit back to B or maybe to C. So there really is no money. You're counting on the time delay for these checks floating around the system. And that worked 30 years ago because the banks were too slow. It doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, everything's instant now.
Right.
And I don't often see people taking a cash advance on a credit card to pay another, but what I see all the time is lines of credit.
Right.
So I've got a line of credit. I use that to make my minimum payments on everything.
Well, think back to the early 2000s. We used to counsel people that, look, if you've got too much credit card debt and you don't have a line of credit, well, get a line of credit because it's better interest. Cancel the credit cards. And what we found that people did was they got the line of credit, paid off the credit cards, and ran them up again. And so they only followed half of the instruction. And it's the same thing is happening now.
Yeah, and using a line of credit where the interest rate is 5 or 6% is obviously a lot better if you have to borrow than a 20% credit card. But you're right. You got to get rid of one then. Otherwise, your debt is just ballooning. And even if you say, okay, I'm not going to use that credit card, well, unless you actually contact the bank and cancel it, then it's still there.
And one of the ironies, of course, is when you do cancel it, your credit rating takes a hit too.
Yeah,
that's a different conversation.
Exactly right. Yeah, your credit rating is based largely on history.
Yep.
And so if you cancel a card, then the history that you had built up for years is now gone. So it's like, well, okay, I'm going to be really disciplined. I'm going to get a line of credit, use it to pay off my credit cards, but I'm going to keep my credit cards there because I want to keep the history.
Right.
But I kind of want to keep them active too, so I'm going to spend a little bit of money on them each month. Well, now I've got a bunch of credit cards and a line of credit, and it's too easy for things to collapse.
And the risk is as soon as something goes wrong, it's more likely to collapse. I mean, we always tell people you have one, maybe two credit cards in your wallet. I mean, the record is still 29. We had one guy come in and we dealt with him because he had 29 credit cards. He financed his business at 20% interest. $245,000 in debt.
Yeah,
and it was just crazy.
And that's fantastic if your business is hugely successful.
Right.
But if you've borrowed $250,000 on credit cards, you're going to have to earn, I don't know, $750,000 to have enough money to pay the taxes on what you've earned and then to pay all the interest and pay off the debt.
Well, the interest is $50,000 a year on $250,000 for credit cards.
So you've got to make $100,000 in profit to pay the taxes to generate the $50,000 that you can then use to pay off your credit cards.
And you're not eating it.
Yeah, that's right. You've got no money. So
that's a distraction.
So, well, let's talk then in terms of numbers, because there are people watching who are, numbers people. Okay, I want to do the math to see if I have too much debt. So what is the math you can do? We've talked about the intangible ways. Okay, I'm feeling a lot of stress, whatever. But what are the math ways to figure out if you have too much debt?
So I think the most important mathematical calculation is to actually list out all of the physical expenses that you have to pay. You've got to pay the rent. You got to pay your utilities. You've got to put together a budget that shows all of the real numbers you have to pay. And that'll tell you, once you've paid all these things you have to pay, how much have you got left to service your debts? And if what you've got left isn't enough to pay for the debts that you have, then you've got too much debt. It's no more complicated than that. mean, lots of folks will tell you, well, all right, if 20% of your income is going to servicing your debt, then that's probably too much. Well, it depends on what your income is, right? It all comes down to, well, we've said this lots of times before, cash is king. You got to be able to make the payments you're required to make. And your priority is you got to have some place to live, you got to have something to eat, you got to look after your medications, all of those sorts of things.
Yeah, you can call that debt service ratio or whatever you want, but you're right. It's much simpler than that. It costs me X number of dollars to pay rent, buy groceries, do everything. That's what I need. This is what I've got coming in. Whatever the difference is, that's what I've got to service my debt.
Or to basically live.
Or live, yeah. So if I've got $500 available and my debt costs me $600, I got too much debt.
You got a problem.
It's simple as that. And when we did our annual Joe Debtor study, the Hoyes Michalos bankruptcy study, we found that the average client we deal with has a couple of $100 available or less to deal with their debt.
Somewhere around $240.
Yeah, but their debt payments, of course, were way higher than that.
Ridiculous.
$1,000, $1,500, $2,000 in a lot of cases. So clearly you've got too much debt. Now you hit on this idea of 20%, 30%, whatever. So if my income is $1,000 a month and I'm spending $200 a month on debt payments, that's okay. But if I get to $300 a month, that's too much, or is that too simplistic?
In my opinion, it's too simplistic, but some people, they need that kind of simple number just as a guide to start with. The issue is the lower your income, the lower that percentage of debt servicing payments has to be. So the example you just gave, guys living on $1,000 a month, paying $200 for debt servicing, that's got to be too much, just because it's 20% of their income. The guy making $10,000 a month, paying $2,000 worth of debt servicing, same 20%, he's probably more able to do it depending on what the living expenses are.
Yeah, because that guy making $10,000 a month, if his mortgage payment is $3,000 or $4,000, he's still got enough money to pay the mortgage, buy groceries, pay for the car, whatever. So for him, 20% is no big deal. But if I'm making $2,000 a month, I need pretty much all that $2,000 a month to live. So
and everybody on $2,000 knows that.
Yeah.
Right? The people that are living that reality.
Yeah. So I agree with you. Focusing on the percentages, okay, maybe it gives you a bit of a ballpark, okay, 20, 30%, you're probably okay. But then how do you calculate that? Do I include my mortgage in that?
Right.
Do I just include the interest on my mortgage, or do I include the full payment?
Yep.
What about my car loan? What about the loan I got for my business? Well, does that really count in that? I mean, it gets to be pretty complicated. So you are an advocate of keeping it simple. How much comes in? How much goes out? Can you service it?
That's right. The argument you're going to have is need versus want. What do you got to have? The needs. You got to pay for your rent. You got to pay for your food. You got to pay gas in the car, all that sort of stuff you have to pay for. Whatever you got left that's available for the things that you want or to service your debt.
Yeah. So you decide where you want that money to go.
Yep.
Now, the common scenario then is I've got too much owing on my credit cards. And so I think, oh, you know what? I'm going to go to the bank and get a consolidation loan because the interest rate will be lower. I assume getting declined for a consolidation loan is a big problem.
It's a big problem for a number of reasons. The first is you take a hit on your credit report because you asked for credit and they said no. The second is if a bank tells you that they won't extend credit to you, that means they think you're already at risk, which I generally take that as a pretty bad sign that your finances need some sort of correction made.
Yeah, because if the bank says no, then where else can you go?
You're going to go to the second tier. And the second tier, so if a bank is going to give you a line of credit at prime plus 3, so I don't know, 6-7% interest, and they say no, your next tier is going to be 12 to 15%. Your next tier after that's going to be over 20, and then you're getting into the guys we talked about at, what was it, short 341?
341, yes.
Somewhere between 39 and 59% interest. I mean, it's the people that are willing to lend you money are a very good indication of how much risk you are already exposed to. The higher the interest rate, the more risk they perceive, which means you should perceive that same risk. There's a problem.
And one of the main reasons people call us is they got turned down for a consolidation loan.
Right.
The bank said no. They won't increase their line of credit. They won't give them one. And the person says, well, I know I could make the payments. Look, I'm paying $2,000 a month now on my credit cards. I could certainly pay $500 a month on my line of credit.
And if people want something to get upset about, a consolidation loan would be a great solution for a good number of people that do contact us. But the bank's not willing to do it. They do their own risk analysis. So you've got a credit card with them and maybe a line of credit, the right answer, and then some stuff with other people. the correct answer is give me a bigger line of credit and I can deal with all of this. But now the bank is helping you pay off other companies. So if something goes wrong, the bank takes the whole hit. They're not willing to do that.
No, banks are very good at mitigating risk.
Right.
Everything they do is about risk. So if I've got 5 different credit cards with 5 different banks, $5,000 each, and I convert that into one line of credit or consolidation loan, now that one bank is owed the whole $25,000. They're taking all the risk.
Well, on top of that, the amount of money they were making in interest on that $5,000 credit card may be the same as now they take on the whole thing. So it's more risk for less money. That's what the bank's way of thinking
Well,
of it.
and that makes sense because if I've got a 5% interest rate on the line of credit and a 20% interest rate on the credit card,
There you go.
that's 4 times as much. So they would have to, even loaning you 4 times as much, they're making the same interest but taking on a huge risk. So if you get declined for a consolidation loan, that's a big warning sign. And if the only place you can borrow is at very high interest rates, that's a big warning sign. What about collection calls? Is that something that is an obvious sign of too much debt, or is that maybe just an administrative thing and not something someone needs to worry about?
Well, just about everybody has somewhere between 7 to 10 items on their credit report. And it's pretty common for, once, twice a year that maybe you screw up and make a mistake and don't make a payment on something. To get into collections, it probably means you're 3 or more months behind. So this isn't a mistake anymore. There's some sort of underlying issue that you're not able to meet all of your obligations. So getting a notice from a collection agency, an email, a text, a call, that is a pretty big warning sign that there's something wrong.
Yeah, and if it's because you had an old cell phone bill from 3 years ago and you forgot to pay it and it's $500, okay, if that's something you can deal with, then it's not a big problem. But I agree with you. And if you're getting a call from a collection agency, then it is a long time since you've been making payments.
Right.
The credit card companies, the banks aren't flipping it to a collection agency the first time you miss a payment.
Well, and it's the tip of the iceberg. So you get that first call, and the next month there's 2 calls because it's 2 different places, and it's exposing the wound, and you got to do something about it.
And then the next level then becomes legal action.
Right.
Either the threat of legal action or actual legal action. If you're getting sued for a debt, then that means the collection agency has already called you a bunch of times.
They've given up on trying to cut a deal with you or convince you that there's some sort of payment plan you should make. Now they're trying to compel you to make a payment plan.
Yeah, so either you've got a serious debt problem or a serious cash flow problem, but one way or the other, you've got a serious problem. So the culmination of legal action is what? What typically happens after that?
Well, so the purpose of somebody suing you is so they can get a judgment. Following the judgment, they apply for a writ of execution or a writ of seizure, which allows them to garnish your wages, attach to your bank account, put a lien against the house. So they're at the point now where they're using the legal system to get their money back from you, and they'll go after whatever money they can find.
Yeah, and if your wages are being garnished,
well, so you had a cash flow problem before. Now this one creditor's taking you to court, and they're taking 20% of your paycheck right off the top before it gets in your bank account. So what kind of a mess is that going to make to your finances?
Yeah, and in Ontario, the maximum garnishment for a typical creditor is 20% of your gross pay.
Yeah.
Which is more like 25 or 30% of your net pay.
Right. And CRA isn't restricted to that 20%.
Right.
They almost always go for 30% off the bat, and they can take up to half.
Yep. Well, if you're a self-employed person, they can take 100% because you're...
If it's a receivable.
Yeah, because it's a receivable. So, and if you get one judgment against you, well, then you could have another one against you. And in theory, it's supposed to be capped at 20%. But if one guy doesn't know but the other guy and the payroll person doesn't understand how the rules work,
right,
you can end up having a serious problem. So, okay, how then do I beat the debt cycle? What can I do? What is the thought process I should be going through to deal with all this?
Well, so the first step is to make sure that you're actually living within your means. You got to have a balanced budget. I've got $2,000 a month coming in, then I can't be living a lifestyle that costs me $2,500 a month. It'll never work. So we've got to get to the point where our budget is balanced. And in fact, if we've got debt hanging around, we've got to be living on less than we make so that there's money available to service the debt. The whole idea behind debt is you're using somebody else's money to pay for something today, which means you're borrowing from tomorrow to pay for today, which means you're not going to have it to use tomorrow. Right? That's the whole concept behind debt. So we balance the budget. We figure out how much we've got available. Then we've got to make sure that we don't need to borrow anymore. We don't increase the debt level beyond what it is when we're starting to do this analysis. And that's a hell of a challenge.
Yeah, you got to stop the bleeding. And even the first point you made that, okay, I got to balance my budget. Well, that's easier said than done.
Right.
Because I can't there's only 2 ways to do that. Increase your income or lower your expenses.
Right. And we all know how hard it is to increase our income. It's equally challenging to decrease your expenses. You can't do it quickly. You can't just change expenses overnight.
Yeah, my rent, I got a 1-year lease. Well, okay, I can't just move to a cheaper place. I've got a car loan that has 5 more years to run on it.
I got to eat.
Got to eat, and those costs keep going up. So there may be some things I can do in the short term. Okay, well, I'm on a month-to-month lease, so I'm going to go move back in with my parents. I'm going to have a roommate, whatever. Maybe I'm close to the end of my car loan, and I can flip it back. But in most cases, there's not a huge amount you can do. And on the income side, same thing. Go to your boss and say, hey, I'd like a 50% raise, please.
See how that gets you.
Yeah, it probably isn't going to go well. So you end up saying, okay, fine, I'm going to get a part-time job. I'll do something evenings, weekends, whatever.
Right.
And great. If you can do that and can still survive working 80 hours a week, that's a possible solution.
Well, and there's a kick to that. So if you do that second job thing, just remember to reflect it in the taxes. Because what we see lots of times is a guy's got a full-time job, gets a part-time job on the side to pay the debts, doesn't factor in the fact that they're already paying taxes on the full-time job, and so they end up with a tax bill in the spring.
Yeah, particularly if your part-time job is something like an Uber driver,
right?
Which is something that's a great part-time gig because I can do it before work, after work, I've got a car, whatever. But you're a self-employed contractor with them.
So there's no tax withheld at all.
And by adding that income into your taxes, you've now bumped yourself up into a higher tax bracket. So not only do you owe all the taxes on that, but you owe all the taxes on your main job.
Happens to pensioners too. They figure, I'm going to go out and get a part-time job. I'm going to greet her at Walmart, whatever the hell it is. And they end up that exact same problem.
Yep. An extra source of income bumps you into the next tax bracket.
Right.
So, okay, there's not much I can do to raise my income or lower my expenses. The next obvious thought would be, okay, I got to sell some stuff.
What have you got to sell, right? I mean, if you have a tax-free savings account, you'll cash it out. RSPs, talk to somebody before you start cashing out your RSPs because they fall into a different kind of category. So what are the problems with cashing in my RSP? Well, the first is you're saving for tomorrow. That's what the whole RSP is, so you'll have money in your retirement. If you cash it out, that money's no longer available. And more importantly, they're going to withhold tax on it when you take it back anyway. They almost never take the right amount of tax. It's always too little. So you end up with a bill in the spring for the taxes that you didn't pay.
Yeah, whatever you take out of your RSP gets added to your income. You go and take a couple of $1,000 out, they withhold 5%. But if that puts you into the 40% tax bracket, then a whole chunk of that RSP money is going to be owed in taxes. And yeah, what else do you have to sell that you can actually turn into money easily?
You're going to sell your coin collection, your stamp collection. You know what? You're not allowed to sell your children. I tried.
No, there's laws. They got laws against everything right now. So okay, I do what I can.
Right.
What then? I've done whatever I could to stop the bleeding, to increase my income, reduce my expenses. I've liquidated whatever I can. So I've freed up a couple of extra bucks. What do I do with those couple of extra bucks?
Well, let's assume that you are lucky enough that you've freed up enough money that you can actually take a look at what you owe and say, okay, well, this is the most expensive debt, the highest interest. I'm going to pay it off first. Make that go away because that then frees up more cash to start on the next one, And there are different schools of thought. You pay off the most expensive, the highest interest rate debt first, or do you pay off the smallest one so you can see that one's been cleared and you can move on to the next one? It doesn't matter what you do. If you've got money available, prioritize how you're going to start dealing with this debt problem and start chipping away at it.
And which do you prefer? You're talking about the snowball method or the avalanche method or whatever. Are you a high interest guy or clean up the small numbers first?
I think it depends on the personality of the individual involved. So if it's somebody analytical, they pride themselves on the way they rationally think things through, deal with that high interest one because it's expensive. If you're somebody that needs that reward of saying, I cleared that credit card, then you do that one first. So it's different for everybody you talk to.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure in my book I talked about that, but I'm an interest rate guy.
Right,
like, okay,
because you're analytical.
Yeah,
you're an accountant.
I'm an accountant, exactly. So if I can save an extra couple of bucks by paying the high interest rate one, do it. But I also get it. I've got this old cell phone bill from 6 months ago that I owe $200 on.
Right.
And if I can just pay that off, that's one less payment I got to make each month. I don't have to worry about it.
Yep.
So you're right. Do the thinking yourself and decide what kind of person am I?
What's going to make you feel better? Yeah. And what's actually going to make a difference?
Now, what if I can't make a difference? What if I just do not have the money to deal with all this stuff? Give me the commercial for your services.
Well, so let's be honest. Most of the people listening to this are probably in this category because you've tried the budgeting, you've tried to chip away at the debts, and the problem is just more than you can handle. And it doesn't take much to get there. When we did our study, we determined that people only had a couple $100 a month to service towards their debts. And most of the folks that we talked to have got, well, the average is $60,000 worth of debt. You can't make the payments on $60,000 with $200. Can't be done. And so you need to reach out to a professional, somebody like you, somebody like me, or somebody that works for us. The whole idea is there are actual legal remedies, solutions that you can do to get out of debt. And they're a lot more common than anybody realizes. So the procedure that's probably the most popular right now, and popular is a bad word, the one that used most frequently, is a consumer proposal. Consumer proposal, you repay a portion of what you owe. The alternative to that is perhaps you're looking at personal bankruptcy. Well, there are legal requirements for both of these things, but the proposal is a much more attractive option for a lot more people, primarily because you're paying back part of the debt.
Yeah, which is what you wanted to do in the first place. And
right.
Like you said earlier, if the bank would have given me the loan at the lower interest rate, then I could have cleaned everything up. They couldn't. Well, I guess I got to do what I got to do, which is make whatever arrangement I can.
And right now we're somewhere around 5 people out of every 1,000 every year file insolvency in Canada, which means they say I can't pay my bills. They're either going to do a consumer proposal, which is it's roughly 60% of the people are doing that, and then the remainder are filing bankruptcy. Over the course of a lifetime, 11% of all Canadians declare themselves to be insolvent. So they either file a proposal or bankruptcy. A bunch of those people end up doing it more than once. That's a topic for a different program. So this is a lot more common than anybody realizes. But like I said earlier in the program, I'll tell my family members, my friends, if I've been diagnosed with cancer, I'm looking for some sympathy. I won't tell them that I've got more credit than I can handle, that I've incurred too much debt, that I'm falling behind in my bills. That's just not a conversation I'm going to have.
Yeah, and to cycle back to what you said at the start of the show, this is a very stressful situation to be in.
Right.
It's not something you want to be in. And so the only way you can reverse the situation is to actually take some tangible action. That's what you're talking about.
That's right.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a great way to end it. If you have more debt than you can handle, and we've listed a whole bunch of indicators that may be the case, then reach out to a professional for some help. Ted, thanks very much for being here. That is our show for today. Thanks for listening. Full show notes are available at YouTube. And if you are watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe because that helps us get the word out. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.